Yeah, and I'm Oscar, and we would be conducting this interview. And first of all, we would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity for us to learn about the reform of the liberal study curriculum, and especially regarding its implementation and some public concerns. Hopefully, this interview could also provide more information and clarification to the future generations taking the new syllabus. So if you are ready, then we'll start the first question.
Yes, I'm ready. Thanks for having me. Hope all of you had a nice Christmas break.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. Okay, so like first, before dividing deep specific issues, could you briefly explain the general aim of this curriculum, like how this reform may help Hong Kong students to develop a mature mindset and other learning skills that may be required in higher education?
Sure. So this curriculum reform on liberal studies is actually part of a holistic review of our entire primary and secondary curriculum. So we set up a task force to review the curriculum 3 years ago. Liberal studies obviously is part of our senior secondary curriculum as one of the 4 core subjects. So in this reform, we are also looking at the other core subjects. So one of the key themes of the reform is to reduce the workload of students. Because based on the questionnaire results that we have collected over the years, the new senior secondary curriculum has put many students have found it quite stressful, and they wish to take some of them wish to take an additional elective subject, but yet the 4 core subjects require them to spend about 65 to 70% of their total curriculum time. So one of the key objectives of the reform is to free up the learning space for our DSE exam. And so the task force on curriculum review put forth some recommendations earlier this year, and the Education Bureau basically accepted most of the recommendations as the direction. In terms of liberal studies, well, by now we all know that there's going to be a new subject. The subject will be rebranded, and the details will be discussed at our Curriculum Development Council. But what we can say right now is that the key objectives of the subject and all the curriculum aims will remain unchanged. So we don't have to be too concerned about the teaching and learning, and also the overall curriculum goals of the subject.
Okay, so do you mean that like the main focus of this reform is to help students reduce their stress and to focus more on other subjects?
Well, in the curriculum review, we want to free up space for teachers and students. That is one of the, based on the questionnaire results that we have collected over the years. The DSE exam has been in place for about 9 cohorts now. And over the years, we have been collecting comments from different stakeholders regarding the implementation of the new senior secondary curriculum. And so indeed, it is one of our primary objectives to free up students' time spent on the 4 core subjects. So as you can see in the report, there are also some recommendations concerning the curriculum on Chinese language, English language, and mathematics.
Okay, okay. May I ask like a very different question now? So I want to ask, when drafting the changes in this curriculum, did the Education Bureau take references of any subject reforms from other places? Like, because I mean, like when we have some changes, we usually need to take some examples and to learn from other countries or other systems. May I ask, like, is there any systems that this reform has referenced?
So if we look back a little bit, back in year 2000, when the education reform was first launched, there have been major changes. There's a complete overhaul of the entire education system in Hong Kong. Secondary school in Hong Kong used to be 7 years. It's now 6 years. There's an additional year of university education. So changing from 7 years of secondary education to 6 years is a major change. I think back then, when we launched the major reform, we did compare and make reference to different education systems around the world. Of course, 7 years is based on the UK model. 6 years may be more similar to a US or mainland China model. I believe at that time we also had to go around the world and explain the rationale of the education reform to various universities around the world. But this task force that I just mentioned, which was set up in year 2017, was mainly focused on the local context in Hong Kong, because the new system is already in place and we are only doing fine-tuning on the DXE curriculum. Although there have been comments, a lot of reactions on the LS subject, overall there are not major changes on the entire DSE curriculum. So this time around, I think we focus more on the local situation, on how to improve on our existing curriculum.
Okay, I have some question on this, because you mentioned this is not major changes in the education system, but like for LS, this particular subject, there is certain big changes, because I think like half of the contexts are being like lowered the percentage, and many other new subjects are added inside. So like under these changes, do the department have some strategy or like methods to help the original LS teachers to continue their work, or like the departments are going to appoint new tutors?
Definitely, there will be a lot of support and training to be provided to existing LS teachers. I'm not sure whether the 5 of you have read an article that I penned. Last month, I also wrote an article in the newspaper from my perspective as a former LS teacher, because I used to teach this subject when it was first introduced in year 2009, over 10 years ago now. So I certainly understand the sentiment and the worries of existing teachers, and be assured that my colleagues in the Bureau will do what they can to support the teachers. In fact, some of my colleagues used to teach this subject as well. So we have a very strong support community for the LS subject, and we'll continue to engage them going forward.
May I ask, is there any plans now? Because like after this change, it will be like an immediate effect, or it will change slowly so the teachers can continue to like educate students in LS, or they're just going to have a like a prehab study in the summer holiday?
Well, we'll roll out a new subject when it is ready. Of course, the preparation of the new subject is still in the pipeline. The CDC, the Curriculum Development Council, is still working on the new curriculum framework, and we'll get it done hopefully in the next month or two, and then we'll carry on the other preparation work, including explaining how to interpret the new curriculum guide to the teachers, and also we'll be providing training to the teachers, as well as there will be briefings for publishers who work on the new textbooks, etc. So things are in order, and we'll, I think, we'll work along with the plan.
Okay, those are my questions now, and Andre is going to like take my place.
So as we talk about changes, you said that they are not major changes, but currently one of the changes has actually raised public attention. So previously, the chief executive, Carrie Lam, claimed that some people are feeding school children false and biased information, and it was important to protect students from being poisoned. One of the false information was the phrase separation of powers, in which it was removed in the liberal studies textbooks that had gone through the voluntary screening conducted by the Education Bureau. This subsequently sparked concerns over political censorship. So how would you, or as a representative of the Bureau, would address such concerns?
Well, it is our goal to ensure that what is being taught in schools are factual and in order. So the reason that we have the textbook vetting mechanism or the voluntary vetting mechanism in the case of liberal studies is to ensure the quality of the textbooks. In liberal studies, actually, we do not have textbooks. That's the official line. The reason is that many schools use various types of teaching materials or reference books. In the schools that I used to teach at, we actually never use any textbooks or even reference books. All the teachers wrote our own notes to be distributed to our students. But anyhow, most schools in Hong Kong end up using some sort of reference books, and this is a development that we may not have anticipated at the very beginning, because I guess the ideal situation is we do not have to use any textbooks. There are a lot of problems with textbooks because the content of the textbooks may have to be changed or updated from time to time, and this is not this is not the traditional way of how textbooks operate. When you have to roll out a new, version of the textbooks every year, that would also drive up the prices of textbooks. So I guess the original intention was to not use any textbooks in this subject. In any case, the actual what is actually happening is that most schools are using reference books. So the Bureau believes that it is necessary for us to ensure the quality of these books which are being used in schools. In terms of what the Chief Executive said, I think the Chief Executive and our Secretary for Justice, Ms. Teresa Chang, already share and explain the rationale behind surrounding the issue of separation of power. I think the separation of powers carries a Western connotation. I think it is a term that is originated in the Western world. In the Hong Kong's context, there's no doubt that the powers of our executive branch, the legislature, and the judiciary are individually positioned, and they have a division of work. There's also no conflict between an executive-led system and an independent judiciary. According to the basic law, we have independent judiciary in Hong Kong, and it is also the chief executive's duty to uphold judicial independence. So I think the debate, is already, being well discussed in the community, and I don't have anything to add in that regard.
Excuse me. I have a similar question, but kind of different. It's more about how this reform is going to be done. So, like what Andre said, there is a point of view by Carrie Lam, and upon that view, she also interpret that in the current curriculum, people or students and teachers wrongly being educated that critical thinking as to something like opposing everything of the government. So that's one of the points that she think that is the wrongdoing of the current curriculum. So I want to ask, like what you mentioned, there is so many problems about textbooks. So I want to ask, how will this reform be made sure that these kinds of wrongdoing won't happen? Like apart from editing textbooks, like teaching teachers, how can us confirm that these wrong information won't be educated and taught by the teachers?
Well, let me put it this way. I think I would, perhaps go a bit further and share with you my belief on, how critical thinking is being interpreted in our teaching and learning. I think the term critical thinking is rather neutral, in the sense that it doesn't promote or encourage, it doesn't carry a negative connotation. But I guess when many people talk about critical thinking, there's a misconception that you have to be able to criticize, to be, to be in opposition in order to develop critical thinking. And I don't think that is an accurate interpretation of the phrase critical thinking. There's a difference between, criticizing different issues and being critical. Being critical doesn't mean that you have to be in opposition against the government, and actually not just against the government, but also against authority and against different subject experts in their field, or against different professions. So this is a misconception when we talk about critical thinking, especially the translation into Chinese, 批判性思考. When you talk about 批判, I may not be able to elaborate this in English very well, but when you talk about 批判, there seems to be a rather negative term. So that's why, in the later versions of government translations, we decided to use 明辨性思考 instead of 批判性思考. Hopefully that helps convey a message that you can be, positive. You can also, when you look at different issues in liberal studies, you do not necessarily have to be in the opposition most of the time. In fact, in order to provide a balanced argument, it is better for students to look at both sides, and then to weigh the pros and cons, and to think the issues from multiple perspectives and from the point of view of different stakeholders before you come to your own conclusion. So that is one of the misconceptions that we want to amend going forward.
So may I ask, does this mean now the education aim is not to teach how to criticize, how to think critically, but rather to analyzing things in neutral ways and to state out pros and cons? Is that the general aim of this reform?
Well, to criticize and to be critical are two different concepts. So what I was trying to say is we focus a lot on criticizing instead of teaching students to be critical. I'm not sure how the subject, was originally positioned, in the sense that, when teachers teach this subject, are most teachers explaining sufficiently that to students that they do not have to criticize every time in order to be critical? I'm not sure whether that is a message that is sufficiently conveyed to students. When I think about critical thinking, I think the roots of that, it goes back to Socrates. To perhaps we can look at to teach students using a Socratic dialogue, to help students find out the truth of knowledge. That is that could be quite demanding, to both teachers and students. But the standard of teaching knowledge with a Socratic method, some may argue cannot be done in secondary school education. So some may argue that this should be at the university level. That's why we want to make sure that the subject is at a level that is suitable for our secondary school students to learn.
Okay, so due to time constraint, I know that you have something else afterwards. So we'll start asking the other questions. So at the start, you pointed out that the Bureau has the task force as a committee to consult for consultation. However, some has pointed out that the Bureau has not strictly followed the recommendations by the task force. For example, the task force recommended to make the IES optional, but it was later decided to be completely cancelled. So as we said that previously, one of the core aims is to enhance students' critical thinking skills or be critical when looking at things. And based on the liberal studies curriculum and assessment guide, the IES supposedly provides such development. So wouldn't a cancellation of it defeat one of the core aims of the course?
Well, can you hear me? Okay. For IES, usually students will pick a topic or a subject, and then they make use of different types of data collection methods, be it, going to library to do some research or interviewing people. And then they, work on a project for presentation. Actually, what the IES teaches students can also be done in junior secondary school. In fact, most schools in Hong Kong, they are already, teaching students to do projects at the junior secondary level. They don't wait until senior secondary to do so. So even though IES has been taken out of the new subject, I don't see any problem in terms of students developing their, project skills, their communication skills, or their skills to write proposals, etc. I'm not too concerned about that. The main rationale here again is to make sure that students have space, additional space in their senior secondary curriculum time to maybe engage in other activities, other OLEs, or if they wish, they take another elective subject. That is the main objective here.
Just want to clarify, do you mean that that instead of having the IES, students will be considered to be able to develop the critical thinking skills in other subjects, so this won't be promoted as much in the LS subject?
But the development of critical thinking skills is not limited to IES. When they debate issues in LS, various issues in LS curriculum, I think they can learn along the way.
So you mentioned about discussing about issues. Another objective of the LS course is to teach students how to analyze contemporary issues in a rational manner. However, Secretary for Education Kevin Yeung said that the revamped liberal studies syllabus should not cover ongoing current affairs. Do you think that this would be a direct contradiction to not be able to discuss these issues?
I don't think there's any contradiction. Again, one of the 6 modules of LS is Hong Kong Today. And I believe, again, there's some misconception that you really have to, when you take the name of the module literally, you have to look at what's happening in Hong Kong every day. And that is actually quite demanding. Does that mean teachers and students have to read newspapers every day and follow closely what's happening in town every day? No. It can be quite challenging to debate current affairs issues when the issues are still developing. We are not suggesting that we should not read the newspapers, but for instance, when the issue is still evolving every day, sometimes we do not have enough facts and evidence to look at the issues objectively. For instance, we are still facing the pandemic every day. So maybe for the issue of whether the government should ban all the UK students from coming back to Hong Kong tomorrow, that would very much depend on a lot of factors. It depends on the situation in the UK. It depends on how the overall strategy that the Hong Kong government takes against the virus. Because the issue is still developing, we are not saying you cannot mention it. It just causes extra burden on both teachers and students. So you can talk about contemporary issues, maybe perhaps after the pandemic is over, hopefully sooner or than later, we could go back and review how the government performed, how different strategies was being put in place. That would be a better timing to look at the issue. But as I said, when the issue is still evolving, it may not be advisable to be, to be following the evolution every day.
So do you mean that only when a case or only when something has been passed, then can the students be allowed to look at the whole picture to discuss
well,
about
it is advisable, in my opinion. As a former teacher, I actually also encourage students to share their newspaper cuttings, in the classes. But what I realize is when you have to sort of follow the daily news every day in order to debate these issues in LS, it can be very, very demanding because there's new information every day. Nobody can stop what is being discussed in the classrooms. Ultimately, it is the teacher's decision to pick and choose what subject matters to use. But I guess we would advise teachers to perhaps not choose the current affairs matters to discuss with the students when the issues are still evolving every day.
So since you said that we're not going to be covering like the current affairs method, then how would perhaps the students be able to understand, for example, complex concepts and ideas, for instance, national development, the national development, the constitution, and the basic law, because, for instance, these could also be forever evolving. And, for example, there has been a newly imposed law by the Chinese government, and this is also considered something new, and it is possible that it will continue to evolve. Then how would students be able to understand it when it is also evolving at the same time?
Well, when the issues are still in development, I think it is best to focus on the facts. It helps when you put aside the personal judgment or, avoid just reading the commentators, or for example, the political commentators, the reason being that a lot of the issues may not be very subjective, but may not be very objective. When you open up the newspaper and simply take the opinions of commentators as yours, it may not be a very comprehensive way to learn the subject. I think that's the point that we are trying to make. Again, these issues are being debated in the community every day. There's no right or wrong answer. It is only appropriate, for the government to explain that it would be quite demanding to ask our students to follow very closely what's happening in town every day. That's the job for policymakers, perhaps. My colleagues at health department, they should follow the pandemic closely. They should map up the strategy in our battle against COVID every day. But should we require a student in Form 4 or Form 5 to do the same. I don't doubt students have the ability to do so, but because they have so many subjects to take care of, and we are not asking our students to become experts in current affairs issues, because they have various subjects to learn. And the goal of liberal studies is to train students who have some general skills, some generic skills in their critical thinking, analysis of various issues. They don't necessarily have to be, experts in certain fields. They can leave it when they go into higher education.
So moving on to the next question, apart from the cancellation of the IES, a pass-fail system was also not recommended by the task force, but why was it adopted in the end?
We decided to take one step further. Pass or fail helps further alleviate students' burden in terms of the stress on students, it being a core subject. Actually, even at university level, some courses are being taken as pass or fail, even though they are credit bearing. So I don't see there's a problem in terms of motivating students to learn, as long as it is fair and applies to all students.
So you talked about being fair, but would you fear that those who score higher may not be able to show that this is one of their strengths, which might cause unfairness during university admissions, which is just only pass and fail?
Well, we are going to implement a new subject across the board for all students at Form 4, when the subject is ready. I think as long as the exam is, designed in a way that it is the same grading system and mechanism for students, it should be fair to everyone. Some may argue that there should not be an oral exam because it doesn't. There's an arbitrary element in an oral exam. But taking out oral exam, for this year, actually, we did not have an oral exam earlier due to the pandemic. Some argue that it is not fair to the students who are good at speaking. But in the end, because it is a change in the system that applies to all students, it is still a fair way to implement the examination. There's also an interview. When in universities admit students, they can also conduct an interview if they wish to test the speaking skills of students. The interview can now easily be done over Zoom, so that should not be too much a concern. And in interviews, universities can also test the analytical skills of students. So if, for example, a university wants to admit students with high analytical skills, there's still other ways to do so in future.
Okay, so we have understood so much about the subject itself. We have some certain questions, like two, three questions about how the social view of the department. So like this might be a very difficult question, but I still want to ask because I'm quite curious. So the Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union stated that the Education Bureau had not inquired about the teacher's opinion about the reform. So may I ask, like, do this suggest the Bureau's supreme authority of educating or like adjusting the system, and like how the Bureau being governed by like different stakeholders? Because I'm not one of the departments, so I'm just curious.
Sure. Now, so I mentioned there's a task force being set up to review the school curriculum. The task force did conduct a public consultation for 3 months last year. So, of course, not all the comments are related to liberal studies. There was a concern over whether the oral exam of Chinese language should be kept. The task force also received a lot of comments and opinions on Chinese language. But other than Chinese language, the task force collected quite a number of submissions about the way forward for liberal studies last year. So the task force actually conducted the consultation and received quite a lot of comments from teachers, including the professional trade union. So we did take their views and opinions into account. But if we step back a little bit and look at it from a bigger perspective, I think the issues surrounding liberal studies have already been debated in the public arena for many years. Ever since its inception, there have been discussions on whether liberal studies should be a compulsory subject. At that time, there is a lot of concern about the fairness on how to grade LS papers and whether students have to hold the same position or agree with the examiner in order to get a good grade. So there already have been a lot of discussions on LS as a subject, whether it should be compulsory, whether it should be made a pass-fail. So I don't think there have been insufficient debate or consultation. Actually, there already have been a lot of comments and debates over the past decade in Hong Kong. Some students even choose whether liberal studies should remain a compulsory subject as their IES topic. So a lot of these comments have been taken into account, and so I don't agree with PTU's accusation that we did not consult teachers enough. I think we have done a lot. Of course, they may not necessarily agree with the final decision, and we will do a bit more to explain the rationale behind the reform. And again, as I said earlier, in my response to your earlier question, we'll continue to engage teachers when we roll out the new subject, and we'll provide the support and training to the teachers to make sure that to try to ease their concerns.
May I ask, so do you mean it is not a traditional practice to ask for the union's opinion?
Well, we had a public consultation, and the teacher union also submitted their opinions to us. And actually, there's also a not just there are quite a number of meetings at the Legislative Council on this subject as well, and so the topic has been thoroughly debated.
then why the union stated that there is no consultation? Then it sounds like they are stating a wrong fact.
I think, you have to ask them. I believe, they are just looking at, whether we conducted a consultation these 2 months, whether we asked them before we announced the final decision on the reform. They may have overlooked what the task force has done last year. But actually, the task force already conducted a public consultation from late June until around mid-October last year.
Thanks.
So let's move on to the last question. Due to the social unrest, do you fear that the subject would be viewed as a political scapegoat, and how would you respond to those who suggest so?
I would respond by saying that we should get over with these conspiracy theories in the community, because the task force on curriculum review was set up in year 2017. That was 3 years ago, before the social unrest started last year. It takes time to reform a curriculum, because a lot of the intricacies involved, and so there may be attempts to tie, government decisions with various conspiracy theories or political agendas behind. But I can attest to say that there's no such thing. It is based on professional judgment and also the interests of our students.
So since that's the last question, and this is the end of the interview, once again, we would like to express our gratitude to you for sparing time to attend this interview, as well as for sharing additional information and giving us a better insight into the subject reformation. Also, we hope that you have enjoyed the interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.